excuse me. I'm going to use the Septuagint names for the 5 books of Moshe in lieu of the Hebrew names, because most of you are not familiar with using the Hebrew names yet. Otherwise, I will use the Hebrew pronunciation for the names of the people and places, because those are the proper Hebrew names. Numbers continues the story of Israel's migration from Mitzrayim, Egypt, to Canaan, the promised land of Israel. Covers a period of roughly 40 years, from about 1290 to 1250 BCE, before the Common Era, on the usual dating of the children of Israel exodus from Mitzrayim. It is thus the sequel of the books of Exodus and Leviticus. Whereas Exodus focuses on the journey from Mitzrayim to Mount Sinai, Leviticus focuses on the law giving at Mount Sinai. Numbers is concerned with the journey from Mount Sinai to the land of Canaan. Numbers divides this journey into 3 main phases. Chapters 1 through 14 deal with the first journey from Sinai and tell us about Israel's fateful lack of faith in their God when they reached the borders of Canaan. Chapters 15 through 19 deal rather sketchy with the 40 years of wandering in the Sinai Peninsula. These wanderings were a judgment against the children of Israel for their lack of faith in their God in their first try to enter into the land of Canaan. Finally, the chapters 20 through 36 relate to their successful approach to the back door of Canaan via Transjordan. The book closes with Israel poised to enter the land and cross the river Yarden, which means descending. The book's subject matter links it closely with the theme of the Pentateuch or Septuagint, namely the partial fulfillment of the promises to the patriarchs. Back in Genesis 12, 1 through 3, God had promised to make Abraham's descendants into a great nation and to give them the land of Canaan. However, the fulfillment of these promises had taken a long time. In Genesis 15:13 is the prophecy about the children of Abraham would sojourn in the land, not theirs, for 400 years. But in Numbers, the promises seem to be on the verge of fulfillment. Israel had become a large and powerful people whom had sojourned in the land, not theirs, for almost 400 years, who so frightened the king of Moab that he called the greatest prophet of the day Balaam, and to curse Israel. However, Balaam ended up blessing the nation of Israel, predicting even greater power for them in the future, and the victorious kings arising from their midst. Even more significant in the land, chapters 1 through 9 describe Israel's being organized to march from Sinai to Canaan. They are numbered, and the census mentioned in chapters 1 through 26, 1 and 26, excuse me, and the name of the book Numbers in the Septuagint. By the way, for those not knowledgeable about it, all the titles of the books that we know today come from the Septuagint, not from the Hebrew names. And even more significant in the land, and when the frontier was reached, 12 spies were sent out to survey all of Canaan. They brought back a glowing account of the fertility of the land, but suggested it was impregnable owing to the strength of its inhabitants. This was an act of disobedient unbelief comparable to the golden calf incident in Exodus 32. Once again, it was Moshe's intercession that saved the nation from annihilation. But the conquest was delayed still further, and the rebels were forced to wander 40 years in the wilderness of Bamidvar rather than enter the land themselves. In Numbers 19, we learn about the purity of the red heifer. In the last chapter, the need of the priests and Levites are addressed. Now the concerns for the people. This provision for the sacrifice of the red heifer is a precaution to ensure the purity of the tabernacle was not violated by pollutions of impurity or death. This chapter has two main parts, both dealing with ceremony purity, the ritual of the red heifer, verses 1 through 10, and the purification of the people from uncleanness, verses 11 through 22. Some modern commentators prefer the word cow to heifer, thinking the latter came from the influence of the Greeks. Young animals were usually prescribed for the ritual, especially here, and so heifer is the better translation. A bull could not be given for this purification ritual because that is what was given for the high priest or the community, according to Leviticus 4. In Numbers chapter 21 through 21:35, our reading for today, Israel journeys toward Canaan again. In the first month, probably means mid-March, 38 years had elapsed and the 40th year had come. We are not told this directly, but if we compare Moshe's list of the campsites, chapter 20, verse 1 corresponds with 33:36, noting verse 38. We can see that the author has passed over approximately 38 years spent in the wilderness. By October, Israel would cross the brook Yared, 38 years after turning back from Kadesh Barnea in the desert of Paran. Moshe and later Yiftah reviewed this history in Deuteronomy 2 through 15 and Judges 11, 15 through 27. In Numbers 20, verse 1, Miriam dies in the wilderness of Zin. Later in the year, Aharon and Moshe would also die. This marks the end of the generation that would not enter into Canaan. Excuse me. In Numbers 20, verse 22 through 13, Israel complains again about the lack of water at Bamidvar. The wilderness years ended as they began with complaining. It is possible now that the second generation was copying the ways of the first generation. Deuteronomy records how Moshe warned them that they would be stiff-necked and hard-hearted and would soon depart from God. As in times past, the glory of the Lord appeared to confront the rebels. Moshe and Aharon took up the staff, which had budded, the sign that God had commissioned Aharon. But Moshe did not follow Jehovah's command exactly. He did not speak to the rock, but he struck it twice. And his words suggest that he personally was bringing water out of the rock. Because he did not honor God and was not able to lead Israel, he was not able to lead Israel into the land. In Numbers 20, verse 14 through 21, Edom refuses to let Israel pass through the land. Israel began to come into contact with the nations surrounding Canaan. For centuries, their history would be deeply affected by this contact in both diplomatic exchange and warfare. Kadesh was situated on Edom's border. If Israel was to enter the land from the south, they had to pass through Edom. Notice how the text includes the messages between the two nations. Permission was refused. In Numbers 20, 22 through 29, Aharon dies. The location of Mount Hor is uncertain, except that it was on Edom's border. Aharon's death occurred 4 months after Miriam's, around mid-July in the 40th year. These deaths signify the passing away of the first generation. Moshe, now left alone, must also die soon, since the 40 years had run their course, and the land must be possessed without him. Although this passage is marked by sadness, it also heralds the approaching entrance to the promised land. Aharon's eldest son, Eleazar, takes Aharon's place as chief priest. In Numbers 21, 1 through 3, Israel destroys Arad. Arad was a Canaanite city. These very people, with the Amalekite, had destroyed some of the Israelis about 38 years earlier at the very same place, Harmah. Now they attack them once again. On this occasion, Israel relies on God. Israel's vow to devote them to destruction was also in line with God's promise. These Canaanites were to be dispossessed. And I might note here that normally Israel took land, took villages, and occupied them. In this case here, they're destroying the people and they destroyed the cities all around them. In Numbers 21, 4 through 9, the bronze snake is introduced to Israel. Unable to cross Edomite territory, Israel had to go around, which meant turning back toward the Sea of Suf, the Red Sea. And this is the middle of the 40th year. Impatience once again gives way to open rebellion and contempt for the manna which God has provided was voiced once again. The fiery snakes may have been a kind of adder which is known in the sandy wastes of Sinai and which is very poisonous. The anecdote was to look at a bronze snake held up on a pole. Later, Kiziah destroyed the bronze snake because it had become an object of idolatry. 2 Kings 18:4. The lifting up of Yeshua, the Mashiach, was compared to this incident in the desert, as those who look upon him will live. John 3:14-15. It seems that the means of deliverance in both cases was faith. In Numbers 21:10 through 20, Israel journeys to Moab. The pace of the story quickens. And this is interesting because these words, the Hebrew words, when you get into the Hebrew, give you the impression of a quick occurrence. The children of Israel are on the move, speeding toward the border of Canaan. These are the last stages of the journey, and the author surveys them briefly and swiftly. More than all other translations or paraphrases, the NIV, newly inspired version, has introduced a variety of languages where the Hebrew is very repetitive. The Hebrew repeats, they set out and they camped. Looking back through the text, the same phrase, and they set out, introduced the previous stages. The repetition is a device to create a sense of haste in the text. Israel was making haste to reach the land. This travel log contains two quotations. The first is from an ancient record, the Book of the Wars of the Lord, which is referenced in the book of Yashar and in Joshua 10:13 and in 2 Samuel 1:18. The quotation is translated in the NIV is an incomplete list of the place names. However, the Hebrew text may admit other translations. The Septuagint reads, "Therefore It is said in a book, a war of Adonai has set on fire Zo'ov, and the brooks are known, and he has appointed brooks to cause air to dwell there, and it lies near the coast of Moab. The second quotation is a psalm. Israel now sang for joy as Jehovah helped them on their journey. This fits well with the impression which the author is trying to create of rapid progress toward the goal. In Numbers 21 through 35, God assists Israel in defeating Sichon and Og. Israel was hemmed in between Moab and the Amorites, and the way to Canaan was barred. The message sent to Sihon, king of the Amori, was similar to the message to Edom, and the response was the same, to muster an army to repel Israel. This time Israel did not turn away, but was defeated the aggressor and occupied the cities. Again, an ancient saying is quoted to mark this victory. Poets, literally, men who use proverbs, and probably refers to the wise men of Israel, who summed up the situation in an enigmatic saying. Their words anticipated the coming defeat of Moab, whose god was Chemosh. Og, king of Bashan, was the next enemy to be defeated. A fuller account is in Deuteronomy 3:1-11. After both victories, Israel occupied the land taken. More detail is given about the occupation of Transjordan by the 2.5 tribes of Israel. See chapter 32. Amen and amen. I'm going to put copies of this back on the table back there if people are interested. I hope you enjoyed the history there. Very good.